Hey all, I'm Andy Try with Out in the Field with my co-organizers here. We're just going to wait a few minutes for a few more folks to log on and everybody's audio to get all synced up here, but we'll get rolling in just a minute or two.
And while we're waiting, I'm going to say, hey, Scott, fancy seeing you again a couple weeks later. Your mute's on. Oh, maybe. Do shadow puppets.
Yeah, only the host can be off mute.
Oh, okay. Hey, Scott, good to see you again. Thanks for coming.
All right, we've officially crossed over the 4-row mark, so that's a pretty good turnout. We'll start here, and if we have to do a few reintroductions, that's probably okay. So, hey all, I'm Andy Try. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the many organizers here for Out in the Field on the call. We'll start with some introductions, and then we'll get to it. So. As I mentioned, I'm Andy Try. I'm the Bear project leader for the Minnesota DNR, and I help mostly with the events staff and that sort of deal. Colleen, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Colleen Alcanbottle. Use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the Out in the Field organizers, as well as I'm the black bear and fur bear biologist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. So I'm calling from central North Carolina, where I was telling other folks, we actually have a nice day today. It's 70 degrees, sunny, dry. I have the windows open. So quite a bit different weather than I'm sure Wisconsin's dealing with right now. All right, why don't I'll pass it on to Katie.
Hey everybody, I'm Katie O'Donnell. Use she, her pronouns. Also one of the Out in the Field organizers, and I recently moved from Florida to now up in Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm an ecologist and decision analyst and do a lot of wildlife focused projects. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Oh, do I tag the next person? Let's go, Alan.
I'll take over. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Harrington. I also did a move about a year ago from Oregon to Missoula, Montana. I'm currently wrapping up my master's program at Oregon State University, so I'm still a student, but I'm also one of the Out in the Field organizers and excited to be here. I'll pass the baton to Kelly.
Sorry, everything just froze for a while for me on Zoom, so I missed whatever just happened, but I think Alan just said my name. So, hey everybody, thanks for joining us over your lunch hour. Kelly Van Beek with the Fish and Wildlife Service, also co-chair of the Diversity Committee for the Wisconsin chapter. And I'm grateful to all of the organizers of the Out in the Field initiative for coming today to talk to us about the initiative at the national level and perhaps what we can do to bring some of those messages and events and visibility to our local chapter. So thanks again, everybody.
And then we'd be remiss not to acknowledge some of the other co-organizers here. Travis Booms, if you can unmute, go for it, bud.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. I'm Travis Booms. I'm a research wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game based in Fairbanks, Alaska. I use he, him pronouns. And all the other organizers did all the work for this meeting. I joined last second because I had a schedule change. And I'm originally from Wisconsin, went to Point. I have a lot of Wisconsin roots, so I really wanted to try to make this event. So thank you all for letting me kind of crash it last second.
And then we also have a new recruit organizer as well. Let's see if you can unmute here, Carter.
Hi, everyone. So currently I'm also eating on my lunch break between classes. So I'm a student at UWSP. I'm here to kind of get more involved, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. All right. So with that, I'm probably going to be spamming some links as we move along, as my usual role here. But we're going to start with Colleen introducing the initiative and kind of what we've done, that sort of thing. And then we'll get an update from Kelly about what's going on with DEI work within the Wisconsin chapter. Take it away, Colleen.
All right, let me share my screen. And hopefully this works. All right. Andy, thumbs up if you can see it. Cool. All right. All right. So, yep. Once again, Colleen Alcanbottle. I'm going to give a presentation just kind of introducing what the Out in the Field initiative is, since some of you may not be aware of it, because it still is relatively a new program within TWS. And again, thanks all for having us. We really, really, really appreciate you wanting to learn about Out in the Field, because we're pretty excited about it. So what is Out in the Field? Well, first, kind of want to give the background. It started back in 2019, and it was really, this initiative was prompted by, yes, one of our original organizers and surprise guest stars today, Travis Boons. He wrote an article that I considered pretty groundbreaking in the Wildlife Society's Wildlife Professional magazine entitled "I Am One of You," in which he was brave enough not only to pretty much out himself to the wildlife profession, but talked about the challenges he had experienced being gay in the wildlife profession. But he ended the article with a call to fellow LGBTQ plus biologists to build a community, specifically a more visible community. And he ended the article with that call, and turns out a few of us responded to that call. You know, I remember reading that article on a Friday night, and just, I couldn't wait to contact Travis to tell him, like, what can I do to be a part of this? Let's do something. It wasn't just me, but a few other TWS members, including Claire Crow and of course Katie O'Donnell, who's one of the organizers and on this webinar. So we all started have meetings, talking by email, by conference call, about what should we do? What can we do? And so we started to make plans for the 2019 TWS conference that was held in Reno, which happens to be the last in-person TWS conference that we've had due to COVID. But we decided that in-person conference, because it is the largest gathering of wildlife professionals and students in North America, it'd be a great opportunity to make LGBTQ plus wildlifers more visible, so that we can start to support and mentor each other, as well as start to work with our allies on how to foster a more inclusive, welcoming culture where diversity is of all kinds, including LGBTQ plus, is clearly embraced. So at that conference is where we launched the initiative. And one way we wanted to show support for LGBTQ plus wildlifers was to distribute rainbow pins that were attached to pledge cards. And that pledge card explained what it meant to wear the rainbow pin. That pledge card, which is in the slide that you're seeing now, kind of clearly identified the goals of Out in the Field and what it meant to wear the rainbow pin, including the pledge. By wearing this pin, I express my belief that all wildlifers, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity and expression, deserve to feel welcome, respected, and valued in accordance with the bylaws and code of ethics of TWS. So Travis, Claire, Katie, and myself, we also wore LGBTQ plus ambassador ribbons, so we could be very visible to attendees, both LGBTQ wildlifers and allies alike, as well as not only were we readily identifiable, but people knew, hey, I can go up to them and talk to them about being LGBTQ plus, my experiences, my stories, as well as, hey, I can get this cool rainbow pin to show my support. In addition to that, we also had a luncheon so that we could introduce the initiative as well as the related out in the field activities we were doing during that 2019 conference. And I'll be honest with you, I remember the four of us when we all got together to stick the pins in the pledge cards, over beers. We talked about who's going to show up at this luncheon. We thought it might just be us. We weren't sure how we'd be received by attendees, and we thought, well, if it's just us, that's okay. We like each other. We can talk. But yeah, we were pretty nervous, and so about probably 30 minutes before the luncheon started, we started to have folks show up, and even more people showed up, and even more people showed up. Well over 100 attendees showed up, maybe close to 150. It was amazing. So many people showed up. We had to scramble and get more tables, more chairs. The CEO of Wildlife Society at the time, Ed Thompson, ordered more pizzas because we didn't have enough food. So he said, no problem, we'll handle it. We had TWS leadership show up, and it was really positive. It really showed that there was not only interest in this initiative, but there was a desire to support it. And TWS actually did an article about our luncheon that they featured on their website. So we were really excited, and we knew, okay, this initiative is needed within the Wildlife Society. So going to what is out in the field, our initiative has 3 goals. And one thing to keep in mind is that unlike other underrepresented groups, LGBTQ plus wildlifers were not easily identifiable. So there's a lot of times we don't even know who else identifies as LGBTQ plus. When we're in the workplace, in the classroom, out in the field, or at conferences. Further, we just have identified that TWS lacks at least visible LGBTQ plus leaders who can be, serve as examples for leadership and serve as role models. So with that, we identified that one of the first goals for out in the field was to increase visibility of LGBTQ plus wildlifers within the Wildlife Society. And then after that, to build a community, and then to also identify ways to support LGBTQ wildlifers, including both students, early professionals, and professionals. So those are our 3 goals. Again, it's on the pledge card. And so next, I'm going to talk about, how do we achieve these 3 goals that we have for the initiative? And I will be honest, this webinar is one step towards achieving those goals. But the next few slides, I'm going to show you resources that we've developed that can be used by both LGBTQ plus wildlifers and allies alike. Okay, so resources. One, we have a website. The website address is there, wildlife.org/OiTF. That's the acronym we like to use. And one of the first things you'll find on the website is our contacts. So as mentioned before, there actually were 8 of us. Now Carter is a recent addition. So yeah, and we have information in the about section of who does what within our initiative, event planning, student liaison, et cetera, et cetera. So one, you can just get information on how to contact us. The other thing on the website is we try to keep it updated with meetings, especially meetings related to upcoming TWS conferences. We tend to have quite a few activities related to the conference, and so we try to post that information here. Under the news and resources information, we have additional resources, including the Google form to sign up for emails. So again, everybody can sign up for this email list, allies and LGBTQ plus wildlifers alike. You'll see it, Andy will be doing it repeatedly, but if you go into the chat, you'll see a link to sign up to be added to the email list. And so also on the website, you can click the news section. I know it's weird, but we had to work within the parameters of TWS website's framework. And so under the news section, there's resources, including the Out in the Field packet. After the success of that inaugural event at the 2019 conference, we had quite a few people come up to us and ask us, hey, how can I have out in the field events within my TWS organization unit? What can I do to promote out in the field? And so we decided to create a packet that's designed to share tools, outreach material, and information on how TWS organization units can implement out in the field events within their unit, including at their annual meetings. So I kind of wanted to hit on some of the key aspects of the Out in the Field packet, just to give you an idea of what's in it. First, again, go to wildlife.org/OITF, click news, and you'll see the packet there. It's a PDF. Once you've downloaded the packet, we really encourage you to kind of review the packet and all its content. And then once you've done that, contact one of the organizers. I believe I'm listed as one of the main points of contact to talk more about trying to have events within your organization unit. So go through it, then contact us. But what the packet's really serving is, you know, a guideline for different types of events you can have, and they can be simple to involving more effort. So one of the first pages in this packet is not only how to use the packet, but it gives examples of different events and activities that you can consider for your TWS organization unit. So some examples could be, you know, encouraging use of pronouns on name tags and registration at your annual meeting, or distributing out in the field pins and the pledge cards at the meetings, and if possible, establishing an out in the field ambassador within your TWS unit. And then there's other ideas that again are in the packet for you to use to promote out in the field within your unit. In addition to some of the ideas we offer, we have more information on some of the outreach and visibility tools that we've developed, such as information on the Rainbow Pen and Pledge Card, including if you're interested in distributing the Rainbow Pen and Pledge Card at an event or within your TWS unit, how to do that. Katie is actually the main point of contact for that, as well as since you're attending the webinar today, we have a link if you would like to request that we mail you an out in the field pin. We also have information on the ambassador ribbon, as well as pronoun guidance. You know, why do you want to use pronouns? One thing I did want to highlight is that ambassador ribbon, because one of our suggestions is, if possible, try to identify LGBTQ+ ambassador within your TWS unit. The reason why is, again, it's going to meet one of our goals, and that's to increase visibility of LGBTQ+ wildlifers within TWS. And that ribbon's a great way to do that, because it is only worn by TWS members that identify as LGBTQ+ and are comfortable being visible. But by doing so, it increases our visibility to each other and our visibility at conferences, meetings, and to our allies. The other benefit besides being more visible is that other LGBTQ+ wildlifers, again, students or professionals, when they see someone wearing that ambassador ribbon, they know they can go up to them and talk to them and share their stories and experiences, because they're talking to someone that can relate to them. And as I've mentioned, yeah, these ambassadors hopefully are the ones to also distribute the outreach material. So last thing in that packet is just additional resources. One, information for our allies on how you can be a good ally, as well as so far there's been 3 articles written in the Wildlife Professional magazine, and we have all 3 of those articles in this packet. So you don't have to go digging through your old stack of magazines, or the digital version, or maybe maybe you don't get the magazine because you're not a member of National. However, you can at least read those articles here in the packet. Another resource that we hope will meet our objectives of supporting each other and building a community is our virtual happy hours. At the TWS conferences, we tend to have a lot of activities going on. We identified that there was a need for LGBTQ+ wildlifers to connect and network with each other throughout the year, not just at the conferences. We promote these happy hours through our email list, the one I mentioned that you can sign up through the Google, as well as we have a Twitter page where we announce these happy hours. So we don't have any plan for the rest of 2021, but I know we're going to start planning events for 2022. So if you're interested, stay tuned. And then this is just a list of some of the resources I've mentioned. One of the key ones is that we do have a Twitter account. Katie is one of the social media persons. So Katie, as well as 2 of our other organizers, Silas and Liz, they're in charge of this Twitter account. It's a great way to stay up to date on events we have, as well as other information of interest. And of course, the website, signing up for email, the packet, and then I won't mention it really right now, but one of the links we'll probably share with you is we have started to develop out in the field swag, t-shirts, water bottles, stickers. We've developed that in order to create a fundraising mechanism to help financially support some of the events that we like to conduct throughout the year, including at next year's conference that's going to take place in Spokane, Washington in November 2022. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I don't know if we want to take questions now. I'll leave it to Andy since he's the MC if we want to take questions now, or hold off until after Katie's given her presentation.
I think what I'll do, since most everybody is muted and it might get a little crazy unmuting everybody, is I will send a Q&A form link out, and they can enter any questions they have, and we'll prep those and touch on those after Kelly gives a DEI update for the Wisconsin chapter. And then this will be the same form we can use for some discussions later or while Katie's given her presentation. So I just shared that link. And then with that, Kelly, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sure, thanks. Looks like I see the link there. So feel free to, folks, to submit some questions there if you have some right now. I wanted to give a little bit of an update on what the diversity committee for the Wisconsin chapter has been up to, sort of since our inception, I guess, at the last in-person meeting we had. There was a motion by Tammy Ryan to form a Women of Wildlife committee, and that sort of evolved into a diversity committee. And throughout 2021, Jennifer Merriams and myself have been co-chairing that committee. And so some of the things that we have done include providing opportunities for webinars like this. We decided that we didn't really want to do our own DEI focused webinar series, since there are many opportunities out there now for folks to engage virtually in hearing about DEI initiatives or topics. But this one in particular is pretty specific to TWS, and we are interested in hearing feedback from people in our chapter about how we could bring some of the out in the field initiative to the local level. So that's one of the things we've done. If you were at the annual meeting in early 2021 for the Wisconsin chapter, you may have seen that we had a Women of Wildlife PowerPoint right before the plenary started. That was an initiative of the diversity committee. Some other things that Jen and I have been working on throughout the year. One in particular that's of interest to us right now, especially, is we started the first subunit of TWS to try to take the wildlife vocalizations concept to our subunit. So we're trying to tell stories of people in the Wisconsin chapter, or at least in Wisconsin. They don't necessarily have to be a member. And the whole point of wildlife vocalizations is for us to recognize that while we all are passionate about wildlife, we're all people as well. And storytelling is a great way for us to connect, especially in these times. And through telling stories about ourselves, we can help others who have similar circumstances feel visible in the chapter. So you may have seen some announcements through the IT recently about contributing a story. We are going to add some other language to the website. If you log in, I think actually you don't have to log into the website to see the call for stories, the Wisconsin chapter website, but we're going to add some other language so that just to broaden it a little bit, people understand that any story is valuable. Again, we're trying to highlight stories that help people feel connected. And so we really encourage you to take a look at that. And if you don't have a story you want to tell yourself, but want to nominate somebody, we're hopefully going to have a process for that as well. And then since we're connecting this to the National Wildlife Vocalizations effort, the story submissions actually go to National first, and then they send it back to us. And we have an opportunity, the person who submits the story has an opportunity to also share it at the national level, in addition for it to be highlighted on our state chapter website. Kind of dovetailing from that effort, Jen and I are planning a wildlife vocalizations panel for the annual meeting coming up in March. This was something that was done at the national meeting just this past month, or in November, and I was a participant on that panel. Very well received. Again, a great way for us to interact in person and hear each other's stories. And so we'll be looking for some volunteers to help us fill out that panel as well. So when you see the next call for wildlife vocalization stories, through email. It will also include us looking for folks that are interested in participating on the panel. A few other things that we've been working on that are at least in the beginning stages of being worked on, and hopefully will get fleshed out more this winter, ideas that have been tossed out. One is a more formal mentorship program through the Out in the Field initiative, or at least related to the Out in the Field initiative. A couple of folks who are alumni of universities in the state have suggested that perhaps we can pair up professionals who are out in the profession and in their personal lives and willing to talk with LGBTQ plus students at our universities in Wisconsin, so that students feel like they can have an out and visible life when they enter the profession, since that maybe wasn't some of the experience that we had when we were coming into the professional realm. So if students that are on the call today, or if you talk to students and think that that is a need or a niche that we could help fill, please reach out to me and we can talk further about that. Let's see, let me pull up just our last meeting minute notes, which we had our last meeting in November for the diversity committee. We try to meet quarterly. The last thing that Jen and I are working on and that we sort of honed in on a topic for, at least right now, is, and per suggestion of Bob Holzman, who's on the call today, is the chapter is sitting on a significant amount of money, and it's time that we put our money where our mouth is on diversity and try to provide some funding opportunities for a wide variety of DEI related concepts. And so the one that Jen and I have really wanted to hone in on, with the support of folks who have been attending the diversity committee meetings, is having a grant fund available to people who need additional funds to support something like a summer internship, in particular, giving it directly to that person to support things like housing, to support things like money for food staples. Maybe it's to provide transportation. So really filling in those gaps that we know exist, since people are not frequently paid very much of a living wage and are when they're taking on a summer opportunity, or maybe they're not paid at all. Providing some funds to those folks to help them be able to have a standard of living and also work a wildlife job that hopefully brings them into the profession later. So that's something that Jen and I will be working on within the next few months, and bringing sort of a formal proposal to the board when the time comes. So if you are interested in also helping with that, we do know that there are some other models out there around the country that could help us frame this up. So we're going to be talking to those folks. Allie, I think I saw you on here. I couldn't remember who mentioned that on a call. And so I'm glad that you emailed us, because I definitely want to talk to you more about that. So I think that's all the updates for me, Andy. Thanks for the opportunity for a few minutes to give those.
Excellent. That's a lot of cool stuff happening in my neighboring state. So with that, we will turn it over to Katie O'Donnell. She's going to give a presentation about just some intro to topics that are common with the LGBTQ plus community. And if you have any questions as this goes through, I'm going to send a link out here again for a Q&A link. These are totally anonymous questions, and that'll help a bit of a discussion towards the end if you have any questions or whatnot. If you don't want those questions to be read, just put a little note in the front and we will not read those and try to answer them. But aside from that, take it away, Katie. Thanks so much.
All right. Just give me a quick screen check or thumbs up or something, or I can't actually see you. give me something verbal so I know it's working.
Yeah,
we're good?
You're good,
Okay.
Katie.
Okay, sorry. I'm more familiar with Teams nowadays, so I'm navigating Zoom. Well, again, thanks for the opportunity. I might not have time to go through all of this just for the sake of time today, but we'll see how much we can get through. So I often like to start by talking about just some general terms and concepts that are important when we're talking about LGBTQ plus identities. So we'll start with that term itself. This stands for, this is our preferred acronym or initialism, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and then the plus stands for related identities. We've all seen lots of different variants of this. there's some maybe newer preferred terms, or that some people prefer, things like sexual and gender minorities, or even just more general terms like the queer community. And we know that these terms evolve over time, and also just individual people within the community can prefer to use different terms. But for our purposes, we like to use the LGBTQ plus, because we feel it's sort of the most inclusive without getting, including 15 letters. So what are the concepts that are that kind of fall under this umbrella? Well, we're talking about gender identity, which is a person's identification, for themselves as either a man, a woman, a blend of both, or neither. Sexual orientation, which is a deep-rooted emotional, this could be emotional or romantic or sexual or combination, to other people. Gender expression, which is the way we present that gender identity. So the way we express that through things like our behavior, our clothing, our haircut, the way we talk. And the fourth one that we talk about is assigned sex at birth. So this is involving things like hormones and chromosomes and external and internal anatomy. And an important thing that we always like to remind, or to emphasize, is that every single person has each of these four characteristics, whether they have spent a lot of time thinking about them or not. And each of these is oriented along a spectrum. And in other words, none of these, even though historically and in our society, these are often presented as binary choices. Are you gay or are you straight? Are you a woman or are you a man? Right? But really, none of these are true binaries. They all exist on these continuums. And so these are just a few examples here of sort of the ends of the spectrum and some of the terms that might be in the middle. And I will point out, this is a figure from a book chapter that Travis is a co-author on, and a few of the other co-organizers. And this will be coming out. I haven't updated this slide. It will be out next year before the Spokane meeting. So we've gotten word on that. So that's exciting. Let's see. I think I'm going to skip over a little bit of this for the sake of time. But basically, we can provide some resources at the end if you're interested in sort of learning more about some of these individual terms on the diagram here. If you're interested in learning what some of the definitions are. Let's see. Okay, and then so the other thing to emphasize about this is that where somebody falls on one of these four spectrums does not automatically dictate where they end up falling on any of the others. So infinite combinations exist. I can't say that word this morning. So here's just a couple of examples that I put together. But you can imagine, that again, infinite combinations of lines. And so it's, if you've never really thought much about your own gender identity or your own sexual orientation or gender expression, it might be interesting to a good exercise to sit with this and think about this, when you have a few minutes later. Think about what your line might look like. So whenever we talk about labels and terminology, there's a few points I always am careful to make, that these labels can be used for good or for bad, right? They can be harmful when they're used to marginalize or ostracize others. And they can be harmful when they focus on, single aspects of a person rather than somebody's whole self, right? It can kind of minimize somebody down to their identity. Oh, my cat's gonna join us, okay. Labels, though, can also be helpful because they can help us find others with similar identities and establish supportive communities, just like, you know, out in the field. You know, by putting labels on ourselves, we're able to find other people that, you know, are similar and have gone through similar experiences, you know, and find support for that. So, and it also increases visibility, which, you know, can help foster acceptance in general in society. But as I said before, these terms change over time. You might have two people who use the same term, but define it differently. Or you might have two people who have similar identities, but use very different terms to describe themselves. And all of that is okay. And a person might also adopt different labels throughout their life as they discover more about who they are. You know, the bottom line is that trusting how an individual, whoops, I did not mean to do that. Basically what that said was that trusting how an individual identifies is the biggest form of respect. You know, that was when somebody tells you how they identify, you know, listening to them and understanding that is, you know, just believing them essentially is really important. And the other thing on that slide was that, you know, no one person can possibly speak for the entire LGBTQ plus community, right? We call it a community, but, you know, there's so many different identities within this community, so many different perspectives that, you know, I just put that caveat out there that, you know, I might be speaking here today, but obviously can't speak for everybody in the community. Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay, I don't have enough time to go through each of, I don't think, Andy, do you want to help me decide what to do here? Because I don't think we have enough time to go through both of these.
I think probably going through and maybe reading one or two of those responses from those earlier surveys would be helpful. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left for presentations, which will leave 15 minutes for discussion.
Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay, so just briefly, I guess, then I've compiled some answers from 2 different rounds of surveys. One that I did on Twitter and one that I did with coworkers at my previous job. And so basically ask the question, you know, if you identify as LGBTQ+, what do you wish that your coworkers or your mentor or your advisor, you know, et cetera, what do you wish that they knew? And just asked an open-ended question, and then saw what responses we got and sort of compiled these quotes anonymously, and then grouped them into some of these common themes that emerged. And essentially this, if it's in solid color, if it's a solid background, it represents a student perspective. And if it's in an outline like this, then it represents a professional. But the biggest theme that came out was really just the effects of underrepresentation or being in an underrepresented group. Just these general feelings of you know, feeling outnumbered, just kind of being, you know, it can be exhausting, you know, just existing in certain spaces that aren't very comfortable. It's hard always being the odd person out. Let's see. Yeah, so like some people said, you know, I mean, these are direct quotes from individual people. So things like being trans is not a choice, you know, usage of my correct name and pronouns is expected, not preferred. You know, another misconception is that queer people can be in straight passing relationships, but that's, you know, they're still queer. Another theme was about avoiding assumptions. So, you know, there's no such thing as quote unquote looking gay or looking polyamorous. You know, essentially anybody could be from an LGBTQ plus identity. And again, it just boils down to not assuming straightness or cisgenderness. Another theme was about using inclusive language and showing support. So people appreciated, you know, using inclusive language in talks, seeing visible signs of support from coworkers. Another thing that's really important in our work is the role of field work. That this, you know, in the wildlife field, a lot of our work, you know, happens, as our name suggests, out in the field. And so some people said, you know, look, I'm trans, I'm scared of applying to jobs in rural settings. You know, or somebody said I did field jobs and kept having to move, and you know, every job was different and they had different levels of being out, you know, due to how safe they felt in those different circumstances. Which links to this idea of code switching, which I think is a really important concept for our allies to understand, that we often adjust how we present ourselves in different circumstances in order to make other people feel more comfortable, and so that, you know, we're treated fairly and not discriminated against. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the time and realizing I'm not doing these justice, but I'm just trying to rush through a little bit. The last theme is really about just respecting other people's timing and their process, and that, you know, it's never okay to out somebody, you know, and so just recognizing, you know, when somebody is comfortable being out, you know, it's their process, you know, and it's not something to take personally. You know, if somebody doesn't come out to you, it's, you know, it's just up to that individual person. Okay, so those were the common ones. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to jump now to this last section, which I'm going to breeze through. But essentially just leaving everybody with some tips for, if you want to be an ally, what does that look like? What does it mean? So a few do's and don'ts. And again, as Andy said, you know, we made an anonymous Q&A form. So if you have any questions, we'd like to leave plenty of time for questions. That's why I'm rushing through this. So please, you know, ask a question through that Google form, and we'll take plenty of time to answer those. But essentially, don't make assumptions. Don't assume, you know, somebody's sexual orientation from their gender identity or vice versa. Don't ask inappropriate questions, like what's your transition status, or if somebody is trans, don't ever ask them what their quote unquote real name is. Do be conscious of your own biases. There are some ways. This is a great resource here from GLSEN, which the link is at the bottom there. Oops. You know, you can kind of go through and do your own self-assessment to check your own biases. When you're listening to somebody, listen with the goal of understanding, you know, not just responding. There's lots of ways to incorporate more inclusive language into our everyday life. Avoid using terms like ladies and gentlemen or ma'am or sir. I often get sirred when I go to a grocery store, especially if I'm wearing a hat. You know, so here's some other suggestions of ways to avoid that. One of my favorites, I live in Canada now, but I still say y'all because I love it. Y'all means all. it's a good inclusive language. Seek out knowledge. There's tons of great websites and resources and books and TV shows and documentaries and movies. If you ever need a recommendation, just let us know. Be as visible as possible. Put your pronouns on your email, on your badges when you're at a conference. Take a safe space training if you can. And finally, practice what we call the platinum rule, which is, everybody knows the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule is treating others the way they want to be treated. So all of this just boils down to respect. And we all make mistakes, but when we do, it's okay. Just move forward and pledge to learn and do better the next time. Okay, that's it. We'll stop sharing and hopefully we have some questions waiting for us.
Thanks, Katie. Probably what we'll do now is, so we only have one in the responses so far. So if you still want to ask questions, feel free to do so in the chat or in that Q&A form. And I guess I'll monitor the forums if the organizers want to pipe in and provide some answers for these. But the question is, why is something like out in the field important? Why is visibility so important for our profession?
I mean, I'll take a first stab at that. I think it's, we were just talking about this at a recent meeting. I think to me, one of the most important reasons we need to be visible is, what's that common, what's that saying? If you can't see it, then you can't be it. Something along those lines. Like once you see an example of somebody who looks like you doing what you want to do, it feels possible. And so if somebody, especially a student, is LGBTQ and they're they don't see somebody like themselves represented in the field, then they might not think that it's a welcoming place, or it might not seem like that's a profession that they could do. And so those of us who are a little bit further along in our careers kind of said, okay, look, like we're still a little uncomfortable. I mean, to be honest, it's nerve-wracking to even do things like this and put ourselves out there sometimes, but if we can make students, especially, or people who are younger and starting their careers, if we can make them feel less alone or make it seem like this is a possibility for their career, then it's worth it. It's worth any discomfort that we encounter. So that's my take.
I'll just, Katie, that was awesome. I would agree, as well as, just as I mentioned before, we tend not to be visible. We don't walk around with LGBTQ plus across our foreheads. And so we are invisible. And studies have shown that when people do know LGBTQ plus people, whether it's a relative, a friend, a coworker, they are more accepting of LGBTQ plus people, that they're more accepting, they start to understand it better, which can really help us address discrimination that can occur. So being visible is pretty important in order to help increased acceptance, not only within the wildlife society, but in the wildlife profession in general. So that's the other reason we need to be visible, and some of us have decided we are. It can still be, there are still challenges, because there are a lot of people that are still not accepting, but I have found that those people that aren't accepting, again, because they don't know anybody. So they have these stereotypes of who and what LGBTQ plus people are. And again, by being visible, it allows them to start to learn, oh, wait, you don't meet the stereotype I have. And again, increase that acceptance.
it also kind of creates, there's this this recruitment paradigm for getting folks into STEM. It's called the Leaky Pipeline. And there's been actual documented surveys where they've interviewed people when they start their college career of what majors that were indicated. And those that are a sexual minority are almost twice as much likely to leave STEM than to stick with it than their heterosexual counterparts. And so a lot of that has to do with representation, how they feel included, that sort of thing. And so, you know, it's, you walk around this world and, you know, up until just recently, you could lose your job for being gay, you could be denied a place to live. Landlords could deny housing. They still can in a lot of places. There's all kinds of discrimination that happens, whether it's intentional or not, that kind of gets swept under the rug if we're not visible. And so that's partially why this is so important. Any other organizers have any comments here? It doesn't look like we have any responses yet on the forum.
I would just add it. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
No, go for it, Alan. Go for it.
I mean, my thoughts are all the same as the other organizers. As a student here on this call that still is, you know, on the cusp of making that early career step, representation is really important to me. It's always been really important to me through, you know, the early career path that I've had thus far. And the lack of representation is, you know, largely why I personally want to continue to be a part of movements like this. Is I don't want that up and coming student to go through that experience of not seeing professionals, you know, that they can relate to and strive to be like.
I'll chime in real quick here, Andy, and then you can get to your other questions. I know so many people on this call, and I know that they can relate to events like this in your professional life where you're asked to go to a local sportsman's club banquet or the local PF banquet. And I remember going to those and thinking, I'm never, ever in my life going to feel comfortable bringing a partner to one of these, and how deflating that was, just how very detrimental it was to my thoughts about my career path. And just being able to have colleagues that recognize that that is a barrier for somebody they know, to realize that that even is happening, that's going through their mind, is very powerful. So to have the visibility that way of, for somebody who doesn't think it's possible to see that it is, that there are other wildlife professionals out there who are doing it and living an out life in the public sphere that we are frequently asked to interact in, is very powerful. So whatever you can do as an ally or as a comfortable out person to facilitate an environment where that's very accepted and encouraged, means a lot to a lot of people that you might not expect.
Okay, so the next question is, I have coworkers who identify as white cisgender male and make comments about being excluded since they are not included in these DEI conversations. What would an appropriate response to this be? Admitting that that a portion of our own organizers here identify exactly the same.
Yeah, that's true, because it just yeah, I mean, they probably meant straight as well, but yeah, I think my instinct on that is that they should be part of these conversations, and if they're not excluded, if they feel excluded from these conversations, then I don't know. I mean, we need to revisit that, because we can't do anything without allies. I mean, that you know, the whole point is that we are in the minority, and so we need really strong allies, you know, to be involved in these conversations and learn what they can do. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious to hear more from that person who submitted that question about about what exactly they feel, what types of conversations maybe they feel excluded from. You know, I think it is, one thing I will say is that I think there's an important subtlety in terms of being involved in a conversation versus leading a conversation or sitting and listening to a conversation. And so that might be where the distinction is in this question, that, you know, I don't know. In terms of our events, though, we always make it very clear whether it's open to everybody or it's exclusively for LGBTQ+ people. And when it's exclusively for LGBTQ+ people, that's a space, we're not talking about DEI initiatives and that kind of stuff. It's just support, it's just community building. So anytime that we're really talking about like moving the conversation forward or policy changes or, you know, what we can do within the society or the profession, like we need those, you know, white cis males at the table to be involved in those conversations and be allies.
I was wondering if maybe, and again, I don't know if the person asking the question can provide follow-up, but I wonder if it's more cisgendered, white, we'll assume hetero males feel, I don't know, they're being not excluded from discussions at DEI, but that they're not a group that's considered important for diversity. Do you understand what I mean? That the focus is on others, and that, you know, they're just kind of set aside. And if that's the case, my response to the, you know, your white cisgendered hetero, you know, male colleagues would be, well, you know, there's a lot of underrepresented minorities, especially in the wildlife profession, and so, you know, there does need to be a focus, because especially within the LGBTQ+ community, but also in other underrepresented minority groups. I mean, they look around and there's nobody like them. And how can we change that? How can the wildlife profession look more like the public, in which, you know, we've been entrusted with managing wildlife? It's a public trust resource. But if we don't look like the public, it's going to be harder to get the public to support wildlife conservation efforts. And that's something that's been identified by not only state wildlife agencies, but by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Associations, Wildlife Society, and others, is, you know, we've got to get the public to trust us and get on board with wildlife conservation, because of just the escalating degree of challenges that wildlife is facing now and into the future. But again, one issue we have is we don't look like the public. And we know that the more we look like the public we serve, the more likely the public's going to buy into what we tell them. They're more likely to trust us when we say, look, we've got to do X, Y, and Z, or climate change is a problem and it's impacting wildlife this way. So going back to that question is, you know, I mean, a lot of my mentors have been white, straight men. Some of my dearest friends are white, straight men. But again, they kind of have been the face of the wildlife profession, and we still value them, but we do need to diversify, again, to better reflect the public, as well as to bring in more diverse ideas. You know, again, we could do a whole other presentation about how having increased diversity really makes an agency stronger, because you get those diverse ideas and different perspectives. So that's the other benefit. Again, we're not trying to exclude or ignore white men. We're trying to bring other people in. You know, it's not about excluding folks, it's about bringing more people in. I don't know if I made any sense there. Kind of rambled, but just kind of the thoughts off.
If I could, I think maybe sum that up in I know we're right up against our hour. It's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, that's what I think that's where a lot of those, like that colleague that question was referring to, I think that's where a lot of that's coming from, is that people feel like if they have been in a position of power or privilege, that if other people gain, that they're somehow losing, right? That it's a, you know, it's a pie and there's only so much to go around, but it's not a zero-sum game. Just because other people are gaining some privilege doesn't mean you're losing any. So that's another potential response, but I know we're up against our hour. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes. I don't know what the, you know, situation is, but I just want to recognize that it is 11. And so I'll turn it back over to Andy or Kelly for.
Yeah, so I think and Kelly and Jennifer, if this is going to be an issue, let me know. But I think as long as folks are willing to stay, you're more than welcome to stay. But if you have another engagement, that's totally okay as well. We want to respect your time. For those that, I think just it may be easier to voice some of these questions over the mic, or that may be easier than everybody typing. So if you just have a question or want to make a point, just raise your hand and we can unmute as we go. Is there any problem with that, Kelly, or does that sound like a plan? Or
Not with me. I just don't know, Jennifer, if you hop off, since we're also co-hosts. If
I'm actually going to hop off, but I am going to make you host, Kelly.
okay, yeah. So as long as I'm on, it'll be open. Thanks, Jennifer.
Looks like we have a question in the Zoom chat, maybe.
yep. So the question's from Allie, or a comment and a question. So I wonder if part of it, and presumably that's the feeling excluded from the previous question, is the experience of going to gathering and realizing that nobody here looks like me for the first time if you come from an underrepresented or overrepresented group. And so maybe your paradigm is it's a change to your normal paradigm. Apart from that being an important experience to have for perspective into DEI topics, what if this reflects that white straight men or women can be in fact underrepresented in DEI conversations? And this is a problem too, because their allyship and understanding is important. Allie, any more detail on that or any comments from the group? Feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute everybody, or maybe Kelly can allow them to unmute themselves. I'm not as familiar with Zoom as I should be.
Yeah, and I don't think I can change the settings, but
Oh, it looks like Allie was just sharing some thoughts. So
yeah, good point. Good point, Allie. I think one thing I like to think about too in relation to this topic is that we all need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So if you feel like you don't belong in this conversation, it might stem from a feeling of being uncomfortable, and that's okay. And it's really important to dig deeper into why you feel uncomfortable. What is it that you think you're losing or not a part of? And really assess, again, what the root cause of that is. And that's not negative that you feel that way. It's just that it is. If any of you were at the National TWS meeting where Carolyn Finney talked a little bit about this during her plenary, I think it was just a really nice way to summarize some thoughts about bias and being uncomfortable. Bias isn't negative, it's bias that, and so everybody has them, and we need to understand where they come from and why they make you feel uncomfortable, and they're not inherently negative. So being uncomfortable is not inherently negative. It's uncomfortability. And so I think to me, this is where a lot of these questions come from, is people start to feel uncomfortable and then that they turn that into feeling like they're being excluded because they don't know how to express or understand or work through being uncomfortable. And the places like this, initiatives like this, are all about exploring things that exploring and having those open conversations about how to move forward from those feelings of being uncomfortable.